When I first started working on this video, I really wanted it to seem fun and lighthearted and effortless. But to truly show you what I'm going to be talking about, we're going to have to go deep. So I hope you're ready. What you're watching is a lot of firsts for me. It's my first YouTube video. It's also the first time I've been this publicly gay, and the first time I've been seen in makeup at all. So there's a lot going on here. Hi, my name is Thomas, and I go by Vermalio here, and I'm a digital media artist. I love digital art and user interface design and anything involving creativity and technology. And as much as I have endured from the church and from other Christians, I'm also a Christian myself. So, as you can imagine, I have a lot to say about religion, sexuality, and art and technology. And today I'm here to tell you about my first art exhibition, Out of Order, and how it relates to all of those things. So if you're interested in the behind the scenes of an art exhibition, in augmented reality, because it's an AR art series, or the intersection of queerness and Christianity, this one's for you. So, in my baby gay years, I spent a lot of time contemplating what it means for me to be a Christian and to be attracted to men. Over time, I've seen how queer Christians like myself often struggle with navigating their religious beliefs and their lived experience of sexual orientation or gender identity, whatever that may be. And we often feel lonely and misunderstood by those around us, or even in the closet while trying to navigate all that. And just to clarify, I'm not here to tell you what language you should use to describe yourself. If you're a Christian who struggles with or experiences same-sex attraction, if you're a queer or LGBT plus Christian, if you're gay but you follow the way, I don't know, you're all welcome in this conversation. For simplicity, I will be using queer Christian to encompass this group in the video. So anyways, I went through a season like that myself of confusion with my identity and my beliefs, and in the process I was hurt by various people I cared about and eventually developed clinical depression from dealing with all that. So I know how challenging it can be, and I'll be sharing some of that journey with you as I explain how I created and exhibited my artwork. Overall, I'm going to be covering what inspired me to make Out of Order, what my religious upbringing was like, and how I made the augmented reality function, and the challenges queer Christians as a whole face in our culture. And lastly, how audiences responded to my series at my conservative Baptist college. Spoiler alert, not super well. And because this video is covering so many different topics, I'm including timestamps so that you can watch whatever aspects of my story most interest you. But what I won't be discussing for the most part is any individual art pieces. So if you haven't already, you should at least look at the series on my website first, just so you have an idea of what artwork I'm talking about in the video. Link in the description. And please bear with me as I'm still learning how to YouTube, and there may be weird cuts or lighting at some points in the video. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. I think I can work with that. So I had a lot of things going on in my life that inspired me to make this sad, gay Christian art. Primarily, I wanted to make something that reflected these very unusual and honestly tragic experiences I was having that no one around me in my life seemed to be able to understand. Like, up to that point, both some LGBT plus people and Christians had done things that made me feel hurt and alienated because of these two identities I had. And I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And that sense of isolation was only exacerbated by how lacking queer religious representation is in media. Like, it seems to me that anytime movies or TV shows address queerness in Christianity, they almost always explore it through the practice of conversion therapy, so that Christianity can be portrayed as archaic and toxic, while sexual freedom and expression is seen as the obvious solution to that. And I'm not here to bash any movies like that. But I'm a Cheerleader has my heart. But most people in real life, gay or straight, who leave their religious backgrounds still retain many of the underlying values they grew up with, even if they don't practice that faith anymore. And obviously, many queer people are Christians, so there must be some value that they're gaining from their faith. Where are the movies about that, you know? I haven't seen this, but they could be around, maybe. If you do know of any great stories or movies that explore the intersection with more nuance, please let me know in the comments, because I would love to see something like that. So, between feeling isolated by my community and being underrepresented in the media I was seeing, I just felt burdened by this need to have narratives that resembled my lived experience, even if I had to be the one to make them. So one night while I was thinking on all of that, I just had this idea for an art piece come to my mind, which is Call Now. Part of the meaning behind the piece is it parodies the reductive roles I felt like I was being subjected to by the people around me at the time, and making it made me feel more secure about the way I saw myself as not those things. Surprisingly to me, I continued to have ideas for art pieces after that, and it gradually expanded into a whole series where each piece was distinct, yet they all could come together to tell a bigger story, kind of like a concept album. In fact, I created a playlist where I would assign a song to each piece and listen to the whole playlist from start to finish and imagine the flow of the pieces and how cohesive they were as a set. By the way, also link in the description if you would like to give it a listen. In those early days, I didn't even consider myself an artist, and I had no idea if I would have the motivation to do all of the work it would take to make 15 art pieces. Throughout the 2 years it took me to do it, I constantly wondered if one day I would just get tired of it and quit. I also had no intentions to show my work in public because I was so afraid of what people would think if I was that vulnerable about my struggles with this controversial intersection. I thought, what if queer people criticize me for pandering to Christian conservatism? Or what if people in my church judge me or reject me based off of these art pieces or something? These were all fears that I was slowly able to alleviate as I started working on the pieces and just saw how much artistic merit all of the pieces had. And I decided to use augmented reality for the series because technology has always been a big part of my creative process and my life in general. And since digital media is an important theme in Out of Order, the use of augmented reality cleverly brought together the medium of the virtual AR space with the subject matter of technology and the digital world. The augmented reality tech angle also made the project just more unique and allowed my personality to shine through more. So that's a little bit about why I wanted to make this art when I started the project a few years ago. Now I'm going to take you back to my adolescence, growing up in Southern Baptist Christian spaces and culture. I mostly grew up in evangelical Baptist spaces as a child, and in case you're not familiar with that denomination, evangelical Baptists emphasize the importance of evangelism, which is the spreading of the message of Jesus Christ to others with the intention to convert them to Christianity. So before I talk about the bad of growing up in that environment, I want to say just how much I've gained from being in church community in my life. Like I said earlier, a lot of people who have been in the church have had both negative and positive experiences, regardless of if they are still a believer or not. I mean, I've had some great relationships with Christians where I was cared for and valued, And I also began to really work on my mental health and the quality of my relationships from learning in the Bible how important it is to be in touch with your thoughts and feelings and have grace for yourself and for others. But we do need to talk about how problematic the evangelical Christian culture has been when it comes to sex and gender. I heard a lot of anti gay rhetoric growing up. I heard things like men become gay in order to spice up their sex life because they're bored of women. Boys my age would frequently make jokes about any behaviors of male intimacy or male closeness as gay in order to kind of subliminally police like male relationships to be heteronormative. When I heard stuff like that, it just never sat right with me. I felt bad for gay people who I knew were definitely hearing this stuff wherever they were. I sort of felt like an ally to the gays somewhere out there, but just, not a part of that thing. The teaching on LGBT plus issues also framed it as though to call yourself queer or like anything under that umbrella was basically choosing to rebel directly against God. Like, I thought that if you were really committed to being a Christian, you just wouldn't have same-sex attraction. You wouldn't feel uncomfortable with your gender. And it hadn't occurred to me that I was literally experiencing those things. Like a lot of gay people, I just thought that all of the other boys were having the same experiences that I was having. So I didn't know. I was also exposed to purity culture, which is where abstinence from sex is held up as central to your worth as a person, especially if you're a woman, and that sex is a dangerous and taboo act that needs to be suppressed and controlled. In my churches, I was taught that even being alone with a girl was basically inviting temptation to sin. And second to murder, I felt like losing your virginity was like the worst thing that could happen to you. So because I had no interest in dating and I had like no problems objectifying girls around me, I thought I was like slaying this chastity thing. Like I was excelling. But it also created this confusing dynamic where I felt like I was being held at arm's length from my friends for purity. Like I would go to sleepover parties with my all-female friends and then around midnight have to drive back home while they all stayed so that I wasn't staying the night at a girl's house. And I also felt extremely uncomfortable with my body and just being a person with a sexuality. I hated changing in locker rooms because seeing and being seen in various stages of undress by other guys just felt like way too intimate to me. So I began changing in bathroom stalls because I was trying to apply what I was being taught, which was to stay away from sexual temptation at all costs. So I couldn't make sense of what I was experiencing because I just had no framework for sexual orientation. While I felt ambiguously different than the guys I grew up with, I had no language to express how that could be. I just thought that I needed to become more comfortable in male spaces and learn to enjoy more masculine things like football or cars or whatever straight guys like. Basically, I was doing to myself what they teach in conversion therapy, and I didn't even know what that was at the time. After high school, I went to a conservative Baptist college for 4 years, which is where I made my art series. And at the time, I still attributed a lot of my issues to me needing to work on myself and not to the evangelical culture at large. So the school felt familiar and safe to me in the beginning, which is why I went there. While I was there, I started to engage with more secular media, and I just thought it was so strange how relatable I was finding femme presenting or gay characters and whatever experiences they were going through, which led me to this pivotal moment of being able to articulate to myself that I wasn't straight. Like I had to be something else. When I had that realization, I really thought my life was over. Like this whole American dream picture I had, of a wife and kids and suburbia and all that, it just vanished. And I felt like there was no one in my life that I could talk to about what that was like. In order to cope with that stress, I began studying what people have had to say about sexual minorities in Christianity over time, both theological arguments as well as experiences of people who had similar journeys like mine. Over time, I found that queer people can have legitimate faiths that aren't about hating yourself and dying alone, and neither are about disregarding scripture. And I worked up the courage to start coming out to people in order to find support, which was a huge step for me in processing all this. So that's all great. But once I started coming out, I had a lot of just awful experiences of people responding horribly to me or unsafe people outing me. And it wasn't just the Christians that were doing that stuff, but even some gay guys too. Some of my friends even stopped talking to me altogether once I came out to them. These abandonments and betrayals were very traumatic for me, especially because I felt rejected by both groups, so to speak, and I didn't know who to turn to. My depression ended up developing from dealing with all of those experiences. I actually wrote a poem about what that time was like, and I feel like it really encapsulates what I was feeling overall. So if you want, you could pause this video to read that. So creating my artwork was a way to take action and process how I felt about what I was going through. I thought that while I couldn't fix the problems in the culture I found myself in, I could at least point out its problems through artwork to encourage understanding for people like me. And I wanted to speak to both sides of the culture, so I intentionally made the series to only reflect my experiences and not as much my opinions or beliefs about them, which could have alienated some potential audiences if I did that. I wanted to create space for open discussion regardless of where people were coming from. So basically, that's how my whole story brought me to making Out of Order. This might be my favorite look for this video that I'm trying to pull off, if I'm even pulling it off. So in this section, I'm going to talk about how I made the augmented reality work. But before I get into this, just know that this will be a more technical discussion. So I'm going to be talking about the different types of software I used and how you can use them to make augmented reality art. So if you're not interested in making AR art yourself, you might want to skip this section. In the year of our Lord, 2023, there are basically 4 ways you could go about making AR art, and I will be covering the benefits and drawbacks of each. First up, we have MyWeb AR, which you can use to make web-based augmented reality. That means that the viewer can scan a QR code, which takes them to a web browser that uses their camera, and through that browser, they view the AR design online. I'm not a big fan of this software, though. The website you make these designs on is kind of buggy and is very limited in what you can actually do. The user interface is also cluttered and confusing, in my opinion, both on the developer side and for the viewer. Also, if you want to showcase multiple AR designs with this approach, the viewer will have to close the browser they're using, scan another QR code, and then it will open a new browser and do that for each individual piece, which is kind of an annoying experience unless you pay for their subscription. But the benefit of this approach is that the user doesn't have to download an app or anything. They just have to know how to scan a QR code. So it's very accessible in a way. It also features the ability for users to tap the screen to interact with augmented reality, which is surprisingly not a feature that I saw in any other software. I did not use MyWeb AR for my artwork, but I did use it on the flyers that I put up around my campus to advertise the series. And that allowed people to quickly get an idea of what the augmented reality in the series was like without having to take the time to download an app while they're like walking through a busy hallway. So I definitely think there are good uses for this. Okay, next there is Artivive, which is the app that I used for my artwork. Artivive is an app that the viewer downloads and is available for most smartphones, and it has an easy to use UI, and it's the most popular approach right now because of that reason. This was actually the first exposure I had to AR art in a gallery setting, and I liked it. It does require people to download the app, so it is a little bit less accessible though. Also, on the free plan, there is like no customization you can do basically. So, MyWebAR actually has more features if you're trying to do this for free. But Artivive supports designs with bigger data files, which is huge when you're trying to figure out how to translate your idea to an AR art piece. And it allows the viewer to walk from one piece to the next seamlessly without having to like close out of the app or like with MyWebAR, like switch browsers or something. So it's a much better experience. In my opinion, the app is a great introduction to augmented reality art, and if you're not interested at all in the technical side of augmented reality. Then there's Adobe Aero, which is an app that is in beta, and it has been in 5 years, and seems to be in development hell from my perspective, so it's probably not getting out of there anytime soon. But I did try it, and the UI is confusing on the developer side, in my opinion. And for the user, the app just absolutely drains battery. It's horrible. I really wish Adobe would get their act together on this one because I think it would be so cool to integrate something like Substance with Aero, and it would just open up all kinds of possibilities for the AR art world. But as it is now, I wouldn't recommend it. And lastly, if you don't like any of those options, you could always build your own app or use like a special augmented reality headset or something. I actually planned on making my own app first, and Artivive was my plan B, just didn't work out. And creating your own software can look really different depending on your approach, so I'll just let you know what I did. I could not afford to get a developer's license and spend time setting that up, so I planned on borrowing tablets with cameras from my school for the exhibition, and then downloading my app directly onto those tablets. The only ones they had were iPads, so I made it an iOS app only. And my developer pipeline was I use Unity, which is a game development platform with a free augmented reality extension called Vuforia, which was super easy to use, and I highly recommend trying that out if you're doing this. Then I built the game as an Xcode project, which is Apple's software development program. And after that, I downloaded the app onto the iPads individually with a personal license. Unfortunately, though, I did run into many issues with my approach. The most obvious problem was how to let viewers use these iPads at the exhibition without them getting stolen. Depending on what spaces I could find, I didn't know if I would have even like a door to lock the gallery behind or if there would be cameras to kind of watch over the space. I was just kind of planning on like camping out at the exhibition in order to protect those iPads. Also, if you download a custom app directly to an Apple device, it will expire in about a day. So then you have to re-download it again, which was getting like super annoying as I was developing it. But the nail in the coffin for me was that once I placed all of my AR assets finally into the app, it just stopped working because it would crash due to how much memory the app was using. Artivive doesn't have this problem because it stores the data in the art pieces remotely, like in a server or something, and then only downloads it to your phone once you're like looking at the piece. So I realized that for my app to work, I had to move my files like somewhere else and then bring them in while the user's in the app. And honestly, I just didn't have time to figure out how to do that. And it probably would have cost me some money too, I imagine. So from all of these methods to creating augmented reality, what I learned is that AR is very demanding on the memory of mobile devices as they are right now. And you cannot create designs with more than like 3 megabytes of data in total, or you're going to have like all these problems or it won't work at all. I would recommend trying Artivive to anyone who just wants to try out AR for their artwork if they've never done anything like that before. But if you are making your own, after you go about the process of choosing what software you're using to host the AR, then you can make your designs within the constraints that that program offers. I mention this because if you do it the other way around and make the artwork first and before knowing your software, then you're going to have amazing artwork that you can't even show because it won't be compatible with the app. Trust me, I ran into this problem myself as I kept changing my plan about what app I was going to be using for Out of Order and then had issues with my pieces. So once I knew I was using Artivive for the 3D models, for example, I created them and animated them in Maya and then rendered a flat video of them because using the 3D models directly would have taken up too much data. And the final result actually looked pretty good for a flat video in real life and still gave the illusion of depth somewhat. So it wasn't too much of a loss to do that. I also taught myself After Effects so that I could animate the 2D artwork with like moving elements and changing colors and stuff like that. I tried to make the animation short and loopable in order to make the pieces easy to watch no matter how long the viewer was looking at them. Part of my inspiration for this came from Spotify's Canvas feature, which shows some kind of like repeating little visual whenever a song is playing. They're super short and succinctly convey like the essence, the visual essence of the song that's playing. So it really fit with what I was doing with my designs. So, in summary, making the AR work was incredibly time consuming and often frustrating, but it added so much to the art series. Many of my pieces have a lot more depth to their meanings because of it, and it encouraged viewers to spend more time contemplating my work, which was just really satisfying. So, I got a lot out of making my AR, and I hope that my insights can help you out if you are making AR art yourself. All this for such a short moment. That's really sad, honestly. But okay. You need money to make 15 art pieces. Like, more than you would think. Even though many of my pieces were sort of virtual, I still needed to buy poster prints of the digital pieces and buy the supplies for the physical and mixed media ones. Early on in the project, I estimated that it might cost around $800 to $1,000 to do the whole thing. But in reality, the creation and exhibition of the project cost $1,322.57. So it was a lot. I didn't have that kind of money, so I began looking for funding elsewhere, and I first looked for diversity initiatives that I thought might fit my project. I knew that getting money, period, was really unlikely at my school because they're so, well, anti-gay, but I had to try or there was no way I could actually do it. I got the most traction with the Diversity Development Grant from the Office of Diversity. I applied for that grant 3 semesters before I exhibited the show, so quite far in advance. And when I applied, it was the day before this big homophobia scandal at my school where they denied certain churches from being on campus based off of their beliefs about same-sex marriage. So the timing's impeccable here. My school has a little tradition of these incidents of getting in trouble for being anti-gay. So this was just the latest incident of those, but that's a whole other video. The Office of Diversity actually responded really well to my proposal for funding at first. I had this really encouraging meeting with the office chair who told me that they could help, but then they just kind of dragged their feet on like actually approving the project until I stopped hearing from them altogether. In the 3 semesters that I was emailing them and literally walking into their office trying to like figure out what's going on, someone had applied for the grant money, been approved, and used the money while I was still waiting. My advisor suspected that it was because the faculty in the office just couldn't decide on whether gay people get to be a part of their programming to promote diversity or not, which I could see being the case. It was giving very mixed signals. It was giving like, live your truth, but also remember your final destination. And so I didn't know what was going on. And I was getting this kind of weird feedback from many different places that I tried to get funding. So anyways, I saved all of the receipts of things I paid for and just kept reaching out to people looking for opportunities. Eventually, the honors program I was in gave me some funding, which is great. But it was a little anticlimactic because that program is just like an honors version of the Gen Eds. So it had like no connection to the meaning of the series at all. And they didn't even ask me like what the series was. And they only gave me like a few $100s. So it was like just enough for me to scrape by to make it happen by myself. So with that out of the way, I also needed a space to show the artwork, obviously. I originally envisioned it in my university's only art gallery because, of course, like where else would it go? But they would not allow it. Shocking, I know. So they booked their only gallery space a year and a half in advance. So there's pretty much no way a student could show an exhibition there unless they had a complete body of work put together by like the first 2 years of college when they're just finishing their gen ed classes. I actually did come to them about this within that absurd time frame, but I didn't actually have the pieces put together to apply at the time, so I still couldn't do anything about it. So without the space, I began badgering professors and faculty and even students, just asking people for suggestions of where to go for a space. And for a long time, I honestly thought there wasn't going to be one, and I wasn't even going to be like showing these pieces. And it was just discouraging. Like, some of the suggestions people had were so bizarre. Like, why don't I put up a 1-day pop-up exhibition for like 15 art pieces? Or why don't I put it outside or in a parking deck? And I'm sorry, but do you really think I'm going to be putting my art series up in like a creepy, dirty parking deck, or like on the quad where it could rain, or like the Spike Ball Bros are just going to topple it over? Of course not. In my journey, I ended up finding that there was this expansive hallway available that is only rarely used just by the department that's like right beside it. And it was large enough to show everything. So that's great. But it was a very weird space to work with. The hallway was very long and curved, so there was no way that you could see all of the pieces at once. And it also had these odd like awnings, and I ended up using that to display some of my pieces. The space also didn't allow for room for like a group of people to gather together, or it would like completely block the hallway. So I couldn't have an opening reception or anything really to like celebrate this accomplishment with people. So in order to work with that, I created a top-down view document of sorts that I made myself to help me plan out the series. So that way I didn't have to like be in this hallway all the time while trying to plan this out. And the professor who let me use the space said that I could display my stuff anytime, but that all I had to do was just not damage those like horrid, nasty yellow walls. And like the honors program that gave me funding, they also didn't ask about what I was displaying. So it's just kind of strange to me that no one was wanting to know that. So with all of that, I was honestly shocked that I got some funding in an exhibition space. My expectations were like through the floor at that point with the school. So yeah, I was happy in a way, but the satisfaction of having my work shown was really overshadowed by just like how much bureaucracy and possibly homophobia even I had faced up to that point. As I was approaching the exhibition, I also made a website and put the pieces on there, so that way people who were interested in the project but like couldn't be there could still see what I've been working on for 2 years, especially since I didn't have an opening reception. Okay, so now that I've covered like where I'm coming from and how I got inspired to make it and the space and money, let me just talk about the more like general cultural challenges that queer Christians face today. So first off, let me say that I am not a representative of the whole queer and Christian world, obviously, and no one person can be. However, I have been a part of the community. I've been to talks and social groups, as well as engaged with online spaces over the years, and done a lot of work on my own to understand my personal experiences and thoughts about everything. And like the title of the video says, there is just a lot for us to feel depressed about right now, honestly. Let me just start with some of the most recent posts in the Reddit communities I'm in about this stuff. Like, just the most recent ones. Should I get a girlfriend to remind myself who I was before all of this came into my life? I need everybody's help now, please. Chronic self-hate. Kinda angry, kinda defeated. Am I asking for a lot in these times? How do I stop being scared of other Christians? Yes. Tired. I have some questions. I'm suffering, trigger warning, religious trauma. I think my marriage is over. Okay. I feel so burdened being in queer Christian spaces because so many of us are hurting. And honestly, I've had a lot of these same thoughts and feelings myself too, so I get where they're coming from. So I want to address what about our culture creates all of this stress and fear and confusion for these people. Let me just give you an overview of what I've seen in my experience. And again, this is not comprehensive, it's just what I've observed. I think one of the biggest challenges queer Christians face is dealing with a double stigma of sorts of being either assumed to be like bigoted and have internalized homophobia by more like progressive people or Christians, but at the same time being assumed to be perverse or like lacking spiritual integrity by conservative Christians. There's not a lot of general cultural awareness about this intersection of faith and sexuality beyond these two types, in my opinion, of the ashamed, sexually repressed evangelical or the loud and proud queer Christian who doesn't take the Bible seriously. And being seen as one or the other just makes it really hard to communicate the nuance of how you actually feel about your sexuality and your faith to someone who doesn't already know about that journey for you. This isolates queer Christians and causes them to feel misunderstood and lonely. But in reality, there is a whole spectrum in Christianity of answers to questions like what is natural and human sexuality, or what causes someone to be queer? Is sexuality fluid? What is the distinction between gender and sex? And it doesn't help that the linguistics of this conversation are so vague. Like, what exactly does it mean to be a Christian? Or what does it mean to be queer? I feel like there's not a shared, concrete definition for these terms like across the political landscape, especially queer. And as a result, people will naturally assert their ideas of what those terms mean onto you unless you clarify otherwise. And that's just a really heavy burden to have to carry all the time. I personally dealt with situations like this where, for example, a man I really liked ended up ghosting me over miscommunication caused by identity-based language. Story time. Early on in the process of working through my feelings about my sexuality, I met this guy who was nice and relatable, and we liked a lot of the same things, and considered being roommates even. And if I had had my gaydar up and running at the time, I would have also noticed that he was a little fruity, but I didn't notice. And one day I came out to him by saying, "Hey, I just wanted to say that I experience same-sex attraction, and I wanted to mention that since we are considering being roommates and all." And when I said that, he just had this deer in the headlights look in his eyes and just said, "Okay." And we moved on to talk about something else. But after that, he ghosted me, like right away. Completely ended contact over this me having SSA thing. And a year later, I confronted him about that because the whole thing actually really bothered me and I wanted closure. And he told me that he was gay and Christian just like me, but because I had said I had SSA instead of calling myself gay, he decided that I was not in a healthy place and he just wasn't going to get whatever he wanted out of our situationship and just started avoiding me. And that's only one of the many experiences, unfortunately, me and a lot of queer Christians have had of being alienated solely based on our choice of language. And this doesn't just happen with word choice either. Like what you wear, how you talk, even the way you carry yourself. All of those things can be perceived as an expression of sexuality or gender identity, even when they aren't to you. Like, I couldn't be wearing these like makeup looks I've had on in this video in public and be passing as a straight man, you know? Because of this, I used to try to avoid wearing anything too feminine. Like, I would try to go for like satchels instead of purses.
Hey, take a picture of me with this puppet dude. Camera's in your purse.
It's not a purse, it's a satchel.
I wouldn't let myself wear like any kind of makeup or jewelry. I avoided shoes that had any heels. And I did all of that because I was afraid of being further alienated from the boys around me. And I worried that, I might somehow be discriminated against if I was wearing that kind of stuff. I'm sure a lot of men, gay or straight, have felt this pressure to present as heteronormative.
Listen, I'm a man, okay? I'm into manly things.
Then why do you have that purse?
It's not a purse! It's my man, Zach. Completely different.
It sure looks like a purse.
And I was only able to work through that intense fear of rejection because I had already come so far in coming out to people and being honest about my sexuality and finding that like the good people in my life didn't, reject me or judge me over that. And feeling lonely is not just a result of being misunderstood or judged, but also due to how hard it is to find and build community in our culture in general. Like in our digitally driven world, churches are actually one of the last public spaces that you can make friends in where you're not being bombarded by advertising or under surveillance by the digital overlords. But for queer Christians, it can be really challenging to find a church where they can be themselves, especially if they have church-related trauma, which is unfortunately fairly common. And churches, and let's be honest, like our whole culture, upholds romance and sexual relationships as like the most essential part of our lives. And if you decide to be celibate for God, you won't find a lot of support for that lifestyle in our culture unless you're going to become a monk or a nun or something. And even if you are pursuing a same-sex relationship that's fulfilling to you, there are governments around the world that have literally made your relationship illegal, or they just have anti-gay cultures overall. At this point, you're basically just role-playing as my therapist, so get ready for some tea. Due to all of the homophobic rhetoric I have heard in churches throughout my life, now I feel a lot more cautious about being around churches or in Christian spaces. I often wonder, would these people actually welcome me if they knew who I was? I also feel embarrassed being associated with the Christian church because of how bad their reputation has become. And I feel uncomfortable in LGBT spaces too, because I fear that people will treat me like some other gay people have, unfortunately, and reject me because of my faith or use of language. All of this has led me to be often wondering how people might potentially criticize me or my work. I feel this pressure to be perfect at everything I do, or people will attribute my failures or imperfections to what they perceive as like my invalid intersectional identity. I'm pretty sure The Velvet Rage by Alan Downs talks a lot about this, by the way, if you want to check that out. So anyways, that was a whole rant, but the point I'm trying to make is that there are some serious challenges that queer Christians face, regardless of their experiences of sexuality or their beliefs about them, or what labels they use to identify themselves with. And I want to encourage you or anyone else to be open-minded about queer Christians and avoid making assumptions about them as a whole. Like, obviously, we're not a monolith. Okay, that's all I had to say. Okay, so that was all really heavy. Let's direct the conversation back to the art series now. So I received various reactions to my artwork both as I was creating it and once I exhibited it. In the beginning, I decided to present concept art for the 15 pieces to one of my professors and a couple of my friends later just to get some feedback on if the series was worth pursuing and putting all of my time and effort into. And my professor told me that my work was too controversial for the school, and I wouldn't have time to finish it before I graduated, and that he would be worried for his child's well-being if they presented something like that. So, my friends at least thought it was cool, so there's that. After that, I didn't really show my work to anyone until I was getting ready to exhibit the show because the pieces were just so vulnerable, and I didn't really know how to talk about them casually if someone was asking about what I was working on without bringing up like everything I just talked to you about. However, after working on it for a few months, I did tell my family that I was doing something like this. I just didn't show them any of the pieces yet, and I got responses like, I'm worried how people will treat you if you show this, or I don't think you should do this because it will cause drama, or, you know, why are you making gay art when this homosexual thing is just like a phase you're in? You know, all that good stuff. My advisor told me that I should have a good support network in case the project was drowned in controversy, but later, once he saw the pieces for himself, he was reassured that it would be received fine, and he was like, "It doesn't scream, I'm gay," whatever that means. Once I got to the actual exhibition, I kept track of the data of how much audiences were engaging with my artwork. In Artivive, which is the app that I use for the augmented reality, you can see how many times each piece was viewed. And from looking at that data, and then also my experience of just visiting the gallery as it was showing, I would estimate that about 50 people or so came to see it, which is pretty good. I expected more like 40, so that was cool. Also, I created a website to share my pieces on, and I could see on that I had about 130 views within the exhibition time. So also great numbers. But what made me feel really accomplished was when the school newspaper that like nobody reads, called The Crimson, released an article about me, and out of order, like in their little like publication. I still have a copy of that just because it was just like so special to me. But the series was never even remotely controversial for the school. Like nobody cared. The president and his board of trustees or whoever could care less that I put some, propaganda for the gay agenda like up in some crusty old hallway somewhere. While it was on display, I dropped in periodically to see how people were responding to the series, and all of my friends were of course proud of me and liked my work, both because, the pieces were great, but also because they knew how much it meant to me to get to that point. One of my friends said it was the first time that she had really felt anything from seeing art pieces in a gallery, and that was like really special to hear that from her. And also one of my friends, she was just like so moved by the pieces. She was like, "I feel like I'm your mother. Like I feel like I gave birth to you and I'm your mom because I feel this." So like she was so empathetic. So that's something. With my family, no one came to my exhibition except for my mom, either because I didn't invite them, or I didn't tell them that I made an art series, or they just didn't want to come. So on top of not having an opening reception, it was just like very strange having almost none of the important people in my life showing up for this moment that was like so big for me. And especially because of there being no opening night, it's like my friends weren't even all together physically to like celebrate it with me. The most common responses I got from audiences was just that it made them really sad as a whole, which made me feel good, that people were impacted by my work and they felt something from seeing it. And also I was told that people were surprised that I made the illustrations and made the augmented reality work too. Like they just couldn't understand how someone could be so good at like drawing and like computer work, I guess, but that's neither here nor there. And here's what I learned about using augmented reality in a gallery setting through like this whole process. The best pieces were the ones that offered a unique experience between looking at the piece physically and then viewing in augmented reality. Like as an audience member, it's exciting to see a piece of art in real life and then see in AR that it like expands the piece significantly in a different direction that you didn't expect, and it's like exciting and interesting. On the other hand, the pieces that only had like minor animations or effects did not add a lot of value to the piece. Like some of the pieces honestly would have been better without AR in them at all, probably. So in summary, it was better to make AR that complemented the piece in a significant way, not just like slightly expanded it, if that makes sense. I also found that the biggest challenge in working with AR is just how demanding it is on the memory of viewing devices. So a lot of work needs to go into optimizing the AR designs to be as data efficient as possible. Also, while conceptualizing the series, I found that if I didn't like document and organize my inspirations right away, I would forget them. So it became critical for me to have an easy to use and efficient system to sort through all of my ideas so that I could use them later. And I also learned just how much more difficult it is to showcase like a exhibition when you have all kinds of mediums that you're putting up together. Like, I thought it would be really cool to showcase all these different types of mediums to add to the series, and it really did add a lot, but it took a lot of time and energy to figure out the quirks of how to show each one and make it like work in the space. And I would have rather spent more time actually just making the artwork, honestly, than figuring out these like exhibition logistics. Lastly, I would say I learned just how essential marketing is to getting your artwork seen. Like, you could have a series that would be a cultural reset, like for real, if people saw it. But if you don't market it, then no one will know about it. And as someone who hates advertising, I've learned how doing the work of promoting your art is time consuming, but like absolutely necessary. And with that, we have reached the end of the video. I have talked through all of this in order to explain how I made Out of Order, as well as all the ways my experiences inspired the series and reflect the broader cultural issues that many queer Christians face. I experienced significant growth and transformation while making it, and I hope that audiences can benefit from seeing that through my artwork and through this video. I really believe that Out of Order can encourage empathy and meaningful conversations, and I hope you're able to get something out of it. Also, please share this video with anybody who you think might get something out of my work too. Just know that there is a lot about my journey that I couldn't talk about in this video, so keep it from getting any longer than already is. And again, if you've come all this way and you still haven't seen any of my pieces, please just give them a look over on my website so you have a fuller picture of what my series was all about. Now that this is all over, I am moving on to a new art series, so stay tuned for that too. And depending on how making and releasing this video goes, I may make more videos, so let me know in the comments if you want more. I would love to talk more about religion, sexuality, art, and technology. So if you want to connect with me, you can follow me pretty much on any platform at Vermalio, but I'm really only posting on Instagram right now. And also sign up for my email list if you want updates sent to you directly. And if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to some of my story and my art. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. Maybe.